Welcome to Rebel Roots Nutrition. I'm Carla, your host. So last week's topic, we discussed nutrition in the context of the phases of the menstrual cycle. And so why that's important, what is happening, some of the hormonal shifts that are taking place during those different phases, and how to support those shifts and those transitions with nutrition. This week, we are going to touch a little bit back on some of the hormonal changes and how to support those nutritionally, really more in the regard to progesterone, specifically as it relates to thickening of the uterine lining and supporting preconception. But we are also going to talk about our fertility signs. So we're going to discuss basal body temperature, cervical mucus, and we are going to think about nutrition in the context of these, as well as the microbiome being another factor involved in cervical mucus. So without further ado, let's get started. Right, so fertility signs and supporting nutrition. So for this topic, we're going to really focus on basal body temperature, cervical mucus, and supporting nutrition for these. The fertile window is observed to be about 5 days prior to ovulation and the day of ovulation, because the sperm can be kept alive up to 5 days by the cervical mucus. So we are, when we're thinking about our ovulation tracking tools, this is the basal body temperature, the cervical mucus, and the cervical position, which we will not talk about. We're just going to focus on the first two. The basal body temperature is the temperature upon waking. So the expectation is to take the temperature at the same time every morning. And this can be kind of a challenge, but ideally you want to take it at the same time every morning. We're looking for this temperature shift that takes place. So it's lower before ovulation. The temperature is somewhere between 97 to 97.7 degrees Fahrenheit. And then 1 or 2 days after ovulation, the temperature should rise roughly 0.2 of a degree, which I know sounds really small. It's very subtle, but this is very common. It usually stays until just before the next period. And it's just important to realize that this is a tool to predict ovulation, but it really only tells you after you've already ovulated when you see that temperature increase. So it's very useful if you're really good at tracking and journaling, and you're able to do this over several cycles so that you can kind of get a sense of when to expect ovulation. And then that, of course, helps you to plan when to be sexually active, if the goal is obviously trying to conceive. So if your temperature is on the lower end, say lower than 97 degrees consistently, this could be a sign that perhaps you're not getting enough calories or enough quality sleep, or it could be related to a thyroid issue. So paying attention to a healthy and trying to achieve a healthy weight is going to be key here, because oftentimes if we are underweight, this can result in hormone disruption. And this is usually anything below 22% body fat. So this can affect the thyroid, estrogen, but when it affects the thyroid, the thyroid is what is regulating our metabolism and therefore regulating that basal body temperature. So very important to think about this. So shifting to cervical mucus, this is present about 2 to 7 days prior to ovulation. There's what's called peak and non-peak. So this is before ovulation and after, before ovulation, and then the peak is right there 1 day before ovulation. So the non-peak is happening earlier than this, but really both are fertile. Some research suggests that the peak is more hospitable to sperm, which is, it just has a different consistency and really there to help the sperm along. So estrogen is what is causing this, mucus to develop. And what's really interesting to me is that there's a specific pH that it's ideal for sperm. So, we want to be thinking about, the types of nutrients that are going to support and the types of conditions that are going to support this pH for the sperm. We'll talk about that a little bit more here very soon. There are some factors to consider that do impact cervical mucus: medications, surgical procedures. Medications, there's lots of different medications out there that can be problematic. But as an example, thinking about even fertility drugs like Clomid, antihistamines, and the pill as well. So other issues like surgical procedures, cervical dysplasia, infection, endocrine dysfunction, stress, nutrient depletions, and especially nutrients that are there to support the thyroid, and sleep as well impacts our cervical mucus. Lactobacillus is the most abundant bacteria that is present in the vagina. And so this is important because it produces lactic acid to make an acidic vaginal pH. So that's about a 3.5 to 4 is the pH. And this is important because it's protecting from infections like bacterial vaginosis, yeast infections, that kind of thing. So again, back to this pH, the sperm really likes a pH of 7 to 8.5. So it's much more alkaline. And what happens is the increase in estrogen also increases this pH right around ovulation, just in time to be hospitable and welcome the sperm. And, as I should have mentioned, the cervical mucus really is brilliant because the cervical mucus, it does so many things, but essentially it is there to help with sperm motility, and it's there to help the sperm really reach its destination. So some causes of hostile cervical mucus could be a bacterial infection, it could be a yeast infection, or hormonal imbalances as well. But the greatest takeaway is that the cervical mucus is really incredible. It's designed specifically to, again, support sperm motility, filter out abnormal sperm, and preserve the sperm up to 5 days so that it could potentially fertilize an egg. But there's also evidence of a crosstalk here between the gut microbiome and the vaginal microbiome. So just wanted to note that, and I put a resource in here with a great article that talks about this relationship. So now to the nutrients. What are we looking to do here to support our basal body temperature? Well, we want to make sure we're consuming adequate macros. Our macronutrients are carbs, our fat, and our protein, and we want to increase those ratios on exercise days, that intake on exercise days. So I like to think of a 30-30-40 ratio, though there's no specific recommendation. It can look different, it could be a variation of this, but I like the 30-30-40 because it's just easy to remember in my mind. But that is referring to 30% protein, 30% fat, and 40% carbohydrates. And so we really want to support a healthy weight, not overweight, but not underweight. But eating cooked warm foods, which I've talked about in the past, and this is very popular in Chinese and Ayurvedic medicine. They talk about the importance of eating warm and cooked foods. And this makes sense because it also takes more energy to digest and process cold foods. So we want to really take the load off of our digestive system in this way. We also want to pay attention to nutrients that are supporting the thyroid. So selenium, iodine, zinc. Selenium comes from a lot of seafood. It also, very high source is Brazil nuts. Iodine also comes from seafood, but also seaweed. And of course, iodized salt. But sea salt is really generally the best way to get our salt in. And I'm, a fan of getting my iodine from whole food sources like seafood and seaweed. Zinc, a great source of that is pumpkin seeds, but seeds more generally contain zinc. A lot of them do. And then avoiding certain foods that are going to just not be supportive of our body temperature. Alcohol is one of these. It generally might temporarily raise our body temperature, but it ultimately impacts it negatively. And then, of course, gluten and soy, because of the impact on the thyroid. And caffeine suppresses the appetite. So ultimately, this can contribute to underconsumption of calories. Nutrition for cervical mucus. So here we're looking at overall nutrient-dense diet to support our hormones, normalize the cycle, because we also really want to think about supporting our estrogen, since this is one of the hormones that is involved in the production of the cervical mucus. We also want to pay attention to hydration, so including bone broth and coconut water and other sources, natural, healthy sources of electrolytes, and of course, water. But, cervical mucus is fluid, and we need to pay attention to not drying our bodies out and keeping them hydrated. And there's also some evidence to show a correlation between antihistamines, which are very drying, and a lack of cervical mucus. We also want to provide certain nutrients that are important to cervical health: vitamin A, folate, vitamin C, B6, B12, zinc, L-arginine. These are all important nutrients. Vitamin C, colorful citrus fruits, colorful veggies, bell peppers. That's a great source of vitamin C. Folate, generally we can find that in our leafy greens, which we always want to incorporate a lot of these. Vitamin A, we can get it in the preformed vitamin A or beta carotene form. And we're eating a well-balanced diet, we're gonna get enough of this, as well as taking a prenatal vitamin as well. But carrots, sweet potato, even leafy greens, and then animal products as well. Eggs and salmon are great sources. B6, we can get that from bananas and chickpeas, salmon as well. So a lot of these overlap. B6 comes from animal sources, and then of course is fortified in nutritional yeast. And then the zinc, again, as I mentioned earlier, seeds, pumpkin seeds specifically. And L-arginine is an amino acid, and this is found in meat, fish, nuts, legumes, dairy, and whole grains. So, again, a well-balanced whole foods diet is going to provide most of these, and especially alongside your prenatal vitamin. Food sensitivities can also affect cervical mucus. So I just highlight journaling here and just start observing any food reactions that you might be experiencing. It's just good practice generally, but it can help to identify potential foods that are just causing inflammation, and inflammation is going to potentially disrupt hormones and get in the way of that cervical mucus production. And finally, nutrition for the microbiome. So again, here, that microbiome is so important. We want to have the right conditions for sperm. And so this is going to include our fermented foods like kimchi, kefir, yogurt. Just kind of experiment and find the ones that you enjoy and try to incorporate them a few times a week. And then probiotics are very safe, and these can be also incorporated as well. So I would highly recommend just working with your healthcare professional to determine which one would be right for you. And that is what I got today. So hopefully that was helpful information and maybe gets you thinking about kind of how to support your fertility signs. And I would highly recommend, if you're not already, tracking these signs, finding a log that works for you, either a paper form, just writing it down. Sometimes I just jot it down in a notes section on my phone, or finding an app that you really like. There's a whole ton of them out there. So if you just Google search that, you'll come up with a whole bunch. But I highly recommend you start tracking if you haven't already, and start journaling your food choices, and if you haven't already. All right, thanks again for tuning in. I look forward to having you back on for the next episode. And here's my contact. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Take care.